Hello, my name is Lem. Um, this is, I guess, just a little independent project that I'm starting. Um, in this, I'll be reading and writing poetry. Um, in this video specifically, um, I'll just like be lightly discussing my plans with this little independent project for the future. Um, and probably just finishing off with what I really wanted to touch base on, which is how to interpret the metaphor in your life and translate that onto paper through the means of poetry. So let's begin. Um, my plans for this channel are just to read poetry and write it, but also briefly discussing how to interpret poetry in a way that is specific to you. I feel like what's important to note with poetry is that everybody's interpretation of it will be different. Um, so when you read and write poetry, it will always be in a way that is most likely significant to you. I feel like when you read a poem, your goal is not to be like, what did he mean by this? What was the goal with writing this? I feel like the real end goal is to interpret how it affects you. And that might mean that your interpretation of the poem is completely different from somebody else's. You might extrapolate entirely different meanings. And I guess my goal is to teach you how to do that, but I'm not really interested in that with this. I guess this is just a platform for me to share my poetry and my thought process while I create and interpret poetry. Um so I guess that leads me into the next section of this video, and that'll be how um, the importance of interpretation of metaphor in your day-to-day life. Um, Obviously, my takes will be different from what you might think about any of this. This is an unscripted video where a kid tries to describe how to write how to read write and interpret metaphor in your daily life. I think it's important to understand at a base level that everybody's interpretation of something will be different. I think everybody benefits from writing poetry, not because it'll make your life better, you know it'll just make your life better, but because it'll change your perspective. I was talking to a friend and we spoke, and I recommended that he write poetry, not because I thought it would help him, but because I thought it would change him. When you write a poem or you read poetry, you are interpreting things in your own way, as I said before, and when you read or write poetry, it's your job to decide whether you interpret the positives that may or may not be there or the negatives that may not be there. Um, so it's my goal to help you decide whether or not you want to interpret the positives or negatives in your life through poetry. When you look at the world around you, I think there's so much metaphor steeped within everything. Um, You can look at anything and find some hidden meaning, and you can write about that. But I mean, it's everywhere. We're even, over here, right, right there. I've got a guitar that isn't mine, strapped right there in my room. And I think there is some inherent meaning behind that. And what I mean by that is like it's a guitar that's not mine. It was my father's. Me and him share um, a complex past, yet still I value the musical connection we might have. I mean, and this is just really face value stuff. Um, And the goal with this is to assist in seeing that sort of, you know, deeper meaning, that history behind things. And, whether or not the guitar goes to show something positive because of how I still value our musical connection, or whether it goes to show something negative because of our strange history. It's my goal to, no matter what path you choose, the positives or the negatives, to help you decide what you want to focus on. And that takes me into a valuable lesson, I guess you could say. Um, Obviously, this is directionless, but I think it's important to note the inherent value within everything, because without it, it's nothing. I mean, you don't want to just look at things face value, because then they're meaningless. I mean, everything has a history, like the Goofy Stratocaster, okay? And I want you to focus on that, because not only will it, help you interpret your life differently, but it'll help you. I suppose I mean more artistically. You can accomplish more, you can write more when you look at the world around you as having more meaning than somebody else might think that there is. I want everyone to interpret that and move forward accordingly and write something about it. That could be poetry, or it could be prose. It's your choice. The goal behind this is to have you interpret independently. The the upside of poetry for me is that I can express myself and express the histories of my life without telling everybody everything constantly. I mean, I can post my poetry online, and it can mean something deeply personal, and that will only be understood by me because of the usage of metaphor that I choose to use, or the level of interpretation on the morality spectrum, whether I write something positive or negative, or something at face value is negative, but through a metaphor you find to be incredibly positive. I enjoy doing that, and this is the benefit of poetry for me, is that I can express myself in these ways that only me or my friends might understand. And I want to spread the wealth. I don't know if I've said that before, so to speak. Um, because I think everybody benefits from expressing themselves, but I know that some people, much like myself, are a little bit more, secretive. You're not online as much, or you're not, posting Instagram notes constantly about, exactly what's on your mind. And so you can write poetry that expresses what's exactly on your mind, but nobody is going to understand it because, you're using the means of reference, and, you're writing through a perspective that only you understand. And that's pretty neat. Okay. I think that everybody should be entitled to that form of self expression because, it's hard to express yourself constantly if people are, judging the things that you exactly say. So if you steep the things that you say in metaphor and, obfuscity, no one's going to understand. You have that same level of expression without, potentially frying your social reputation. Um, excuse me. On the method of interpretation that you use is up to you ultimately, but I feel like finding out how that pertains to you and your level of interpretation, that which you do see, the meaning that you do extrapolate from day to day objects or like mannerisms of the people working past the window is up to you, but I suppose that what I want to do is help you find that level of interpretation. Ultimately, that technique that you use that will have you writing fantastic poetry. I per se am not a fantastic poet. I write amateurish poetry, but I benefit deeply from writing it. It's not fantastic, but I want everybody to experience that level of freedom, that level of being anonymous while still expressing myself to the world. I mean, it's like you could probably put your shit in front of a, like grade A poet critique, and they might get close, but ultimately it's completely up to you what you write, how you write it, the methods of metaphor and obfuscity that you do use. Um, and I suppose that's it. I don't plan on writing a poem today on this channel, but I did want to highlight the importance of interpretation. I really value um finding the good in sorrow. I typically exclusively write about myself and, my failures and whatnot, but I also write that because I typically climax with some sort of triumph, some level of understanding through the other side of through the other side of the mental war, I suppose you could say. Um, and ultimately that's the goal, is that I find myself happier on the other side because I understand what it is I'm writing about, why I'm writing about it, and how the words I use, how the passage pertains to me. I suppose next time I'll write some poetry for you guys, the method, and then I'll also disclose the methods that I use more explicitly to write poetry. And that'll be all. Thank you.